So Sam, here we are again. Thanks for joining me for the GSC Grays monthly update. I think January is known as the conference month, and this year's been no different. I think there's some key things that we need to cover today, not least of which is the SFI, the implications of both the UK government water white paper and the EU standards dynamic realignment. So I think we'll start by going through what's happened in the conferences this month. I think one of the big things from earlier in the month was obviously farmer collaboration seems to be really quite high up on the agenda for the government. And I know that part of the funding package that was announced at the Oxford Farming Conference was a £30 million fund for farmer collaboration going forward. Did you see similar things at the Yorkshire Farming Conference? Because obviously that was something I wasn't attending, but was there similar themes there?
Yeah, I mean, collaboration is something that's been talked about for a long time, but I think the fact that, the Yorkshire Agricultural Society managed to drag the best part of 700 people together shows that farmers do want to listen to each other, share ideas, and as you say, that's kind of been reflected now in the government's collaboration grant funding offering going forwards. Equally, opportunities keep coming up for farmers to work together, and so yeah, it would suggest that things are moving in that direction for sure. And look, there's lots of good ideas out there. There's people doing some really good and interesting things, and it would be good if the industry or the wider industry could make use of those and learn what might work on their farm and equally what might not and what they shouldn't bother with. Yeah,
and I think that's been a key theme with some of the tenders and stuff that we've seen just recently, is that sort of knowledge sharing and actually what works in particular situations, and getting groups together to sort of develop that going forward. And some of that's private money as well. It's not just the government source money. So I think it is a common theme that we're going to see going through the next few months and years. I mean, other things that came out of the conferences and the other events was actually, I think, data was a big thing. Particularly again at the two conferences and a couple of other events that we've attended, and how we can use data to improve margins. I think we need to be a little bit more savvy in terms of the information that we can gather from all of the equipment that we have already. And it was again another common theme at LAMA. I don't know whether you're seeing more of that in your clients.
No, it's as you say, the technology out there and what the machinery producers, manufacturers have now been able to put on farm in terms of, measuring output of these machines. And let's be honest, these machines cost a hell of a lot of money, and we want to make sure that they're working correctly and they're earning a keep. And it's one thing gathering that data and paying the subscription to do so as well. It's the next thing actually using it correctly to then, inform those decisions when that machine comes up to swap, or actually, is that machine right for the job that I'm asking it to do? Should it be doing more? Should it be doing less? So no, absolutely, it's probably something we've talked about for a little while, and the technology's there, and it's a case of now, plumbing those two bits together essentially, and making sure we're basing our decisions on that.
Yeah, and a lot of that feeds back into the stuff that we've done previously, where we've talked about how do we improve margins within the industry. It's not necessarily chasing the higher price, it's managing the costs of production and actually generating the margin by trimming the cost and actually producing the product cheaper. So I think there's some really key themes that are coming out of that again, we're going to have to keep an eye on as we go forward in the year.
Yeah, I suppose the one thing I would say on that is you're absolutely right. Ultimately there is, in all of the costs structures that we've got out there, whether it's our variable costs or our fixed costs, there is room to do better. There always is. That being said, as I said before, there are a lot of very good operators out there that have, for the last, however many years, have been keeping a very good eye on their cost. And without dwelling on the fact that, prices aren't great at the moment, whether you're on the arable side of things or milk, perhaps, ultimately the margin is dictated by the price. And again, we're not going to necessarily dwell on particularly arable prices at the moment. But I think it's, whilst yes, we can absolutely look at our costs, we've also got to acknowledge that there is bigger things at play. Now, we can't dwell on them because ultimately we can't change the market.
Yeah.
We've got to concentrate on those things that we can actually affect.
Yeah.
But there are lots of good things happening out there already. And it's, I suppose, what am I trying to say? We've got to look at the bigger picture as well.
We have, and it's not just about it's about that getting to the next point, isn't it? It's that survival. So, whilst we might not be making a fortune by managing costs, we make sure that we're still a viable business to get us to the next stage. So,
absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely a key theme. One of the other things I think that came from the conference is we obviously had the announcement earlier in the month of SFI. That was at the Oxford Farming Conference, and the other funding streams that are sort of surrounding that. What's your views on that? Have we any strong views on it?
Yeah, along with the rest of the industry, probably. No, look, it was positive to get a little bit of additional information on SFI, wasn't it? Yeah. Albeit it was a little bit. We know there's going to be 2 application windows in June and in September, and we have an idea of who they are going to be targeted at. But as is often the case with DEFRA announcements, the devil will be in the detail, and we haven't just quite got that yet, have we? You know, they've alluded to.
I think that's fair to say. In terms of definitions, we may be waiting a little time just to find out exactly how we're defining, small farms or eligible businesses. But
exactly.
The reality is we've got something at least as a commitment.
There's something coming back, isn't there?
Yeah.
Which we did know, but we now know when. The key will be obviously getting your ducks in a row before those windows, because like we saw last year with the capital grants, and Emma Reynolds has assured us that we won't have these cut-offs, and sudden deadlines going forwards. But unfortunately, that is in everyone's minds now, and ultimately, if the budget disappears very quickly, because lots of people have rushed in, then the application windows won't open for very long. So people will have to be, ready to roll, essentially.
Yeah, so important in terms of understanding eligibility and the timings that are involved. So I think it'd be safe to say that if you are looking at entering into an SFI agreement, that we need to understand whether you're eligible for it in whichever round it falls within.
Yeah.
And then understanding the timings, because as you say, I think application windows are going to be quite condensed this year. And it'll be about readiness and making sure that you're in a position to make a move when it actually comes around. I think one of the other things that I've noticed when we've talked about SFI is actually the sort of consolidation of actions. I think there's some suggestion that there's going to be less actions in total number this year, but there might be some bundled options as well. I don't know whether we've heard any more about that.
Well, I think it was referred to, was it about 90% of SFI funding had gone on 40 of the 102 options available. Right. So clearly there's a fairly strong weighting towards whatever those 40 would be. I could hazard a guess as to what some of them would have been. I think it will be again, it's been alluded to the fact that it will be a slightly streamlined service. But ultimately we can sit here and kind of guess. For a long time, we'll just have to wait and see. But I think it's probably fair to say that it will be a condensed service. And equally, there's the finances are going to look different, aren't they? There's likely to be a cap of some description in place, whether that's payment rates per option decreasing, or a cap, or a bit of both.
Yeah, or a hectarage cap, I suppose, in terms of each action. And I suppose the takeaway really is that we need to understand how the new SFI is going to dovetail in with the existing agreements and obviously land use that you've already got on the farm. So I think it's something that every farm needs to understand is how's this going to work alongside the other bits you've already got.
Everyone needs to understand it. It's a difficult job. But no, you're absolutely right. There is the risk, of course, like there was with SFI, that those early adopters to schemes, if they don't dovetail correctly, are going to run the risk of, a period of time where they're not getting paid for providing environmental benefit. And that's, one of the key things that the government have always said would not be the case. They've said that early adopters wouldn't be penalised. Some sort of methodology will have to be put in place to ensure that, as an example, with those coming, with a mid-tier coming to an end in 2026, are able to go into an SFI, as of the 1st of January 27, if they want to.
Yeah. I suppose it's worth noting just at this point as well that obviously we talked about SFI and we've talked about other funding that was announced earlier in the month. FIPL grants is another one that's come out. The sort of the 3-year commitment, £30 million commitment to FIPL. I think that's a positive, certainly in the areas where there's eligibility. It'll be interesting to see how that rolls out. I know there's been quite a lot of appetite in the last few rounds, so good that we've got commitment for another 3 years. I suppose the add-on to that is sort of the cluster-based stuff as well. So there was some commitment to the uplands. I don't know, Dartmoor and then Cumbria, I believe.
That's right. Yeah.
And arguably that's going to be there and useful for farms that, historically have been quite reliant on the sort of higher tier schemes, higher level stewardships. I think the fact that there's funding going in the upland areas is a positive. Again, the devil will be in the detail, and we'll see exactly what that means going forward.
No, absolutely. But as you say, both, in theory, positive things.
Yeah. And I suppose in terms of sort of around the SFI bit up at the moment, then what do we think are the key takeaways? What would we be suggesting to farmers at the moment in terms of what they need to be doing in readiness?
Well, look, I think it's, whilst we've been promised deadlines won't, come and go overnight, ultimately there are a lot of people who did miss out or have got, had agreements that have ended or coming close to it ending and will be wanting to know what they can do. Point being is I think they'll be well subscribed to. So if you want to get in, then it's understanding your eligibility criteria. Which of these windows am I going to be eligible for? And yes, we still need some detail on that. But as soon as we know that, it's essentially getting your ducks in a row. What am I thinking I might want to do through this, and essentially being ready to get in an application submitted as soon as possible, not starting to think about it once the agreement window is, so the application window is open. We want to kind of have known that beforehand. And am I eligible? Well, yes, I am. Okay, these are the things that I'm looking to do. As I say, beforehand, so we can get an application in a timely manner, just in case those windows get dragged at short notice.
Well, we're assured that it's going to be a smoother operation this time. But like you say, best to plan ahead and be ready, isn't it?
I think so.
So that covers off really January in terms of events and sort of conferences, which I think we've said quite a few of them. Some of the other key things that have come out of the month, or one of the key things that's come out of the month, is the UK government's water white paper. Mm-hmm. And I think there's some elements of that I think are quite important that we need to understand as an agricultural industry. I don't know if you've got have you had any chance to review it, Sam, yet? Or
well, it's sort of hottish off the press, isn't it? But ultimately, it's going to have an effect on the agricultural industry. Data would suggest that the industry is responsible for sort of 40% of water pollution in the UK. So clearly, there's going to be things in that paper that are going to affect agriculture, and largely from what I've seen so far, that'll be farms with livestock essentially. I think what we're going to see as well a new regulator.
Yeah,
there's at the moment we've got quite a lot of different frameworks, bodies of legislation, and I think a lot of people in the industry, probably myself included, would say it's quite difficult to keep up with. So having kind of one overarching set of regulations, and a central regulator would, be a good thing, hopefully.
Yeah, arguably easier to manage, I would, from a farming perspective and from a consultancy perspective. I think one of the overarching pieces within this document is the fact that there is going to be more scrutiny, as you say, particularly around agriculture. I think inspections are probably going to go up. I think we're talking in excess of 6,000 a year that they're talking about, which is not an insignificant number.
That's what we're going to aim for, isn't it? Yeah,
absolutely. And I think we're already seeing part of that already, because I know that Environment Agency have worked quite hard recently to start doing inspections more from an information point of view rather than holding feet to the coals sort of thing. It's more about sort of educating and making sure that people are complying. So next time round, it might not be quite as lenient, but I suspect it's showing direction of travel. In terms of what we're doing with water.
No, absolutely. I was listening to a podcast earlier actually, and there are obviously lots of inspections, or certainly more so in the last few years from the EA than we've seen in a long time, and it's definitely an advice-led approach at the moment. I think the stats that were quoted were approximately 30% of those initial visits were found to be non-compliant, not necessarily in a significant way. It might have been, a paperwork issue, but when they were inspected or revisited, that figure jumped to sort of 80+% compliance. So yeah, it might not necessarily be everyone's cup of tea, but ultimately these inspections and visits are happening, and by the sounds of it, there's going to be more to come.
Yeah, and I think one of the key focuses in the visits when you talk about non-compliance, there's been a lot of focus around nutrient management, obviously because it's the biggest player when it comes to water pollution. And it probably ties quite well to what we've discussed already, where we've talked about SFI options and whether nutrient management plans are going to be part of that again. But I suppose one of the key takeaways would be if there's an option there and you need to do it and you haven't done it already, then use the SFI or use that means to get one completed, because ultimately you may fall within the 6,000 per year that are going to be happening by 2029.
Yeah.
Another element of it was sewage sludge, obviously quite widely used across the sector.
Yeah.
I think there's going to be some additional permitting and regulation around that. There's some suggestion of.
It does sound like it. Obviously previously it had been sewage sludge had fallen under the safe sludge matrix. I think, as you say, it's going to fall under permitting regulations, with obviously the concern being, as it has been for however long, those forever chemicals and heavy metals that may or may not exist. I mean, ultimately the sewage sludge should be up to standard as it is, but there is obviously concern there, and as you say, I think an additional level. Well, it's going to come to fall under requiring a permit.
Yeah, and whilst there has been controls around it up to now, particularly on the phosphate side of things, I think this is going to be a little bit more rigorous, isn't it, in terms of what's going to happen?
Yeah.
So I think that's another important takeaway from that document. I think we should also consider the fact that it talks about planning and development within the document. And the relevance to agriculture there. Obviously, we've got quite an impetus towards the sort of pig production, poultry production, and in some respects, the sort of finishing beef, where larger units are cropping up, and we're looking for planning permission to build new buildings. There's some suggestion in this document that there's going to be some that the water boards are going to be statutory consultees on this. I suspect that might have quite a part to play in planning consents going forward. Do we see that's going to be any more strict than it's been, or is it too early to tell? Or?
It's probably too early to tell at this point, but you're right in the sense that these sort of farms, livestock farms from different sectors are going to fall into needing more. Again, permitting. There's this talk of a permit to farm, isn't there? Yeah. Now, the pig and poultry sector have arguably been having to do this, certainly those of a certain size, for a long while through the IPPC rules. There's talk of that now being brought into, intensive beef enterprises. But again, as we've kind of said throughout, the devil will be in the detail, because what constitutes an intensive beef enterprise? Is it numbers? Is it livestock stocking units? Is it manure produced or whatever, or live head turned round? We'll have to wait and see. And again, unfortunately, what that will likely bring is additional cost, and it'll just be making sure that whilst all of these inspections are going on at this side, that this cost, that the two are joined up essentially. There's going to be no point in my mind doing lots of inspections and and getting farms up to speed where required here, if they're double handling things over here by expecting farmers to pay to have a permit to farm, so to speak. Why? Hopefully the two will join up.
And I think what we've got to take away from it as well, that it is positives in a way, that farmers are key to delivering the goods for this sort of water framework that's going forward. And this document isn't set in stone yet. This is more about the direction of travel. Where are we going with it, and what might be coming? So I think from the perspective of our clients and people that are watching this podcast, that there's no immediate need to panic, but there's we're just highlighting the need that there's some consideration going to be needed going forward.
Absolutely, and ultimately, there are still, we are working under guidelines at the moment and regulation at the moment. Hopefully this whatever's to come won't, differ massively. Clearly, there are going to be certain changes, but, with farming rules for water, NVZ regulations, as you mentioned, there's funding for doing nutrient management planning through SFI. Hopefully, that's not all going to be completely torn up and go out the window, with whatever comes down the track. What we're expecting is just a more sort of centralized approach rather than possibly, different bits and pieces from different.
Yeah, and I think arguably we've already got a lot of this legislation and a lot of that stuff there.
Yeah, and we should be complying with it ultimately. But we've just got to, as you say, get better. I appreciate these things don't happen overnight, do they?
They don't. So moving on, Sam. Quite recently, we've heard quite a lot coming from the UK government on the whole about the dynamic realignment with sort of EU standards. And whilst it's been quite common in the news over the past few months, there's obviously some significance for UK ag. I don't know whether you want to just expand a bit on, what's happening, what we've got to be looking out for.
Yeah, as you say, it's kind of come out in the news. We've seen snippets and bits and pieces. Obviously, what we're hearing in that sort of or with the audience is the the benefits, the free trade or getting back to that sort of thing movement. But there are some potentially quite big ramifications for agriculture. On the sort of meat packaging side of things, there's that side, but then I suppose focusing slightly more on the arable side of things, and particularly pesticide usage registration, there's potentially a really significant problem. And essentially where this is born out of is since Brexit, the UK has kind of cracked on and registered about 8 to 10 new active ingredients, whereas the EU have done none. Now, depending on where we get to with this dynamic realignment, they could essentially all disappear overnight. And obviously with, those pesticides that I refer to being more recently registered, they are the newer chemistry that we have. There's some herbicides in there, there's some fungicides, some good chemistry. That could have some significant issues with, arable cropping in the UK. A wider study suggests that, that issue could run to, 500 to 800 million pounds worth of issue. And, stock or volumes of crop being produced, reducing by 10 to 15%, maybe more. So there's a potential real issue here.
Yeah, and to put that into context, then the summer that we've just had and the year that we've just had in the arable sector, that £800 million mark is about where we were in terms of the reduction in output from the arable sector this last year as well. So it's not insignificant in its own right.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and it's arguably something that's probably just creeping under the radar a little bit at the moment. Again, it's been raised, and industry professionals are on with this, and as I say, this report's been put together highlighting the potential problem. I suppose what we need to understand next is, it's highly likely that this realignment is going to happen, but it's managing that to make sure that we don't face a cliff edge in 2027, and as I say, those products just disappear overnight, and all of a sudden we're thinking, we've got big issue, or we're already fighting, grassweed issues and in certain seasons disease issues, and all of a sudden we're having to do it without some of the newer pesticides that we've previously had.
And do you think there'll be an issue in terms of residue levels as well for current products that the EU does accept? So I mean, I know they've got different application levels, different residue.
Yeah, different application levels is probably the easiest way to look at it. So what you obviously mentioned there is the maximum residue levels. And again, whilst a product might be registered in the UK and in Europe, quite often, or certainly a number of them, have different MRLs, with them generally being lower in the EU. Hence, if we're using them in the UK and accepting higher MRLs, then is that going to be a problem after the dynamic realignment? We need a practical approach to this, and ultimately something that's going to work going forwards, but that's still to be worked out. And that's essentially where we're at with it.
I think we should also mention, though, we've talked about some of the negatives there. There are a couple of positives in there as well. So if we do get to the stage of the realignment, we're actually talking about, reduced form filling, arguably, for anything that's been exported. Some of the banned goods that we weren't able to trade before, so seed potatoes being one, there's the opportunity that we'll be able to export those again, and also improving the sort of predictability and reducing border delays. So in terms of getting those fresh products across the water, that should improve that position slightly. So whilst we have, again, a few negatives there's also a couple of positives which hopefully would help trade generally.
With all trade deals, there are winners and losers, aren't there?
Yeah.
And, ultimately this has been looked at because it's believed that the net position is a positive one for the UK.
Yeah.
But clearly there are some things to be worked through there. And, we've highlighted a couple here that, if a practical approach is taken, we can work through it, can't we? But as always, we need to know how that's going to be implemented to make sure that we don't, face this cliff edge and suffer some of the losses that have potentially been predicted in the report.
With any luck, a tapered approach, if we're lucky.
Yeah.
And just to clarify timings, we're looking May, June 2027. Is that?
27, I understand it's a priority of the government to get it done. As I've said, I think it's, in terms of it being done, I think that's fairly well accepted now, and equally getting it done quickly is also an aim of theirs. So yeah, I think 27 could be, we could see some changes by then.
Let's wait and see then.
Indeed.
See what comes.
Indeed.
Well, I think that's everything for this afternoon, everything I had on my list. Thank you for joining me again.
No, not at all. Good catch
and
up.
we hope to see everybody else again next month's update.